She said the garage was more comfortable for me, then handed Tom's father, who hadn't shown up in 20 years, my seat at the head of the table. I ate next to paint cans on a rusted folding chair, while my turkey went cold and they laughed over Crystal inside. But the real gut punch came when I heard her whisper about the New Year papers, right before I found the legal draft to declare me mentally unfit. They tried to erase me, silence me, lock me out of everything I built. But I still had one thing they didn't: every record, every receipt, and one hell of a plan. So when I opened that dining room door, my name is William Whitaker, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning I sit with my percolator coffee in the home I built over 40 years in construction, watching sunrise gleam off the cedar porch rails I still maintain. My daughter Sarah and her husband Tom manage the holiday invitations now, while my son David barely returns my calls. The grandchildren, Jenny, Mark, and little Sophie, treat my stories like background noise, eyes fixed on their phones. But I've kept every contract, every receipt, every promise in labeled binders, and my old business partner Frank checks in weekly. The kids don't know I document everything in my leather-bound journal, just like I did on every job site. My shoulders tighten when I think about the empty chair at the head of this year's Christmas table. But let me start from the beginning. I pulled into my driveway that Christmas morning, the same way I had for 42 years straight. The house looked perfect. White lights trimming the eaves I'd installed myself. Wreaths on windows I'd measured twice before cutting. You know that feeling when something's off, but you can't pin it down? Like when a wall's not quite plumb, but you need a level to prove it. The scent of rosemary and roasting turkey hit me the moment I opened the front door, same as always. Sarah used my recipe, learned it from her mother back when we all cooked together. China clinked in the dining room, and I heard my grandkids' voices mixing with the Andy Williams Christmas album I'd played since they were babies. My daughter Sarah met me in the foyer. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Dad, the garage is set for you." My hand froze on the coat rack I'd mounted decades ago. "The garage? We thought you'd be more comfortable there." She was already turning away, heading back to the dining room. "Tom's father needs the bigger chair, you understand." I stood there, coat half off, while my brain tried to make sense of it. Tom's father. The man hadn't spent a Christmas here in 20 years. But I'd learned long ago that arguing with Sarah, when she used that tone, was like trying to nail jelly to a wall. The garage air bit cold through my sweater. They'd set up a metal folding chair, the kind that leaves rust marks on your pants, next to my old workbench. My Christmas dinner plate sat there between paint cans and sawdust, getting colder by the second. The wind whistled under the door, and I could see my breath. Ever notice how silence sounds different in a garage? More hollow, somehow. You might think I'd storm right back in there, demand my place at the table. That's what the younger me would have done, but 40 years in construction teaches you when to push and when to pause. Sometimes you need to let the concrete set before you test its strength. So I sat there, listening to muffled laughter seeping through the wall, fork scraping against my mother's old china. The plate of turkey had gone cold, the gravy congealing into something that looked about as appetizing as dried cork. After what felt like an hour but was probably 20 minutes, I carried my plate back inside. The warmth hit me like a slap. I was about to push through to the dining room when voices drifted down the hallway, making me pause. "Has to be done before the New Year papers are signed." That was Sarah's voice, pitched low, but clear as a carpenter's level. David, my son, mumbled something back. Then, "Tom's lawyer said it's all ready, just needs—" "Shh," Sarah again. "He might hear." My stomach knotted up like a bad splice in a 2x4. I set the plate down on the hallway table, quiet as hanging drywall. The voices continued, but now they were talking about dessert, all casual-like. But I'd heard enough. Papers, New Year, lawyer. The words clicked together like pieces of a puzzle I wished I couldn't see. This wasn't just about a Christmas dinner in the garage. They were planning something that needed signatures and legal approval, something to push me out of my own life. Standing there in that unheated hallway, watching my breath cloud in front of me, I felt time start ticking. Whatever they had planned was set to happen before January 1st, less than a week away. The question wasn't just what papers they were talking about, but what documents might have already been signed when I wasn't looking. You spend decades building something, a house, a family, a life, and you think the foundation's solid. Then one day you find cracks you never noticed, running deep and dangerous beneath the surface. Back home, I made straight for my study. The cedar-paneled walls I'd installed myself welcomed me like an old friend. Funny how some sense can steady your hands even when your world's spinning sideways. I unlocked the bottom file drawer, the one where I kept everything important since Sarah was still wearing pigtails and David needed a step stool to reach the sink. You don't spend 40 years running a construction company without learning to keep precise records. Every contract, every permit, every change order, all filed and labeled in black and white. No guesswork, no maybes. That's how you stay in business. That's how you stay protected. The drawer slid smooth on its tracks, and right there on top, like it was waiting for me, sat a legal document I didn't remember putting there. Fresh paper, crisp folds, official stamps. The kind of document that changes lives, and rarely for the better. Power of attorney declaration and determination of capacity. My reading glasses nearly slipped off my nose as I scanned the first paragraph. The words hit like hammer blows. William Whitaker, cognitive decline, inability to manage financial affairs, best interests, immediate transfer of control. The grandfather clock in the corner, the one that had kept time through 30 Christmases, chimed 10 times. Each ring felt like another nail in my coffin. My hands didn't shake, they never do, but heat crawled up my neck as I circled the key phrases with my red pencil. They'd drafted this thing clean as a new blueprint, timing it perfectly. Most offices would be closed or running skeleton crews until after New Year's. Even my regular lawyer, Jim Peterson, was off skiing in Colorado until January 3rd. 6 days. That's all I had until their January 1st deadline. But it wasn't even 6 days. Christmas had already burned one, and the holiday lull would eat most of the others. The hours were slipping away faster than concrete sets on a hot day. The signature lines at the E bottom told the whole story. Mine was blank, waiting. Sarah's and David's names were typed neatly below, ready for their signatures the moment I gave in. They'd even marked the spots with those little sticky arrows you get from office supply stores. "Sign here, Dad. It's for your own good." I pulled out my strongbox, the one bolted to the floor behind the filing cabinet. Inside was everything they'd need to take control. My birth certificate, social security card, property deeds, bank statements, investment records, and my original will. The one that split everything equally. The one I'd had drawn up back when family meant something different. The leather portfolio I kept for special contracts had just enough room for all of it. I slipped everything inside, watching that blank signature line on the power of attorney like it might grow fangs and bite. Tomorrow wasn't just another day after Christmas. If I knew my daughter, and after raising her through 3 colleges and 2 marriages I ought to, she'd have a lawyer ready. Probably that shark of a partner her husband Tom golfed with. They'd come with concerned smiles and gentle voices, all worried about poor old Dad who couldn't manage anymore. The real question hammered in my head like a loose shingle in a storm. Could I hold out against their pressure without losing everything even faster? One wrong word, one moment of anger, and they might have all the proof they needed that I wasn't competent anymore. I ran my fingers over the portfolio's worn leather. Inside were the papers proving I'd built this life brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Now they were trying to use those same papers to wall me out of it. The clock chimed the quarter hour, each note echoing off my filing cabinets. Time was moving, and I needed a plan before that lawyer showed up tomorrow with his fountain pen and his sympathetic smile. You know that hollow feeling when you've been awake so long it's tomorrow. That's where I found myself at 4 a.m., pacing circles in my study while the old boiler clanked in the basement. Each pass took me past the window, where frost patterns looked like crane blueprints against the black glass. Ever notice how problems grow teeth in the dark? Mine sure did. I could already hear the whispers that would ripple through St. Matthew's next Sunday. Did you hear about Bill Whitaker? His own children had to step in. Margaret Wilson, who'd never forgiven me for outbidding her husband on the Murphy project back in '92, would have that story spread faster than holiday flu. My footsteps on the hardwood must have worn a path by now, 4 decades of building houses, and here I was, about to lose mine to the people I'd built it for. The leather portfolio sat on my desk like a bomb waiting to go off, stuffed with proof that meant nothing if I couldn't figure out how to use it. Remember what I said about keeping records? Sometimes The weight of all that paper feels like chains instead of armor. Every receipt, every statement, they were supposed to protect me. Now they just showed how much I had to lose. My legs felt heavy as wet, concrete as I sank into my chair. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a stubborn old man who couldn't see what everyone else could. The business was gone, the crews scattered to other companies. What was I holding on to? Pride? That's a cheap foundation to build on. The phone in my pocket buzzed, startling me so bad I nearly knocked over my cold coffee. Who calls at 4 in the morning? The display lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Frank Morrison. Frank and I go back to when safety harnesses were optional, and our first crane lease needed both our signatures because neither of us had enough credit alone. He'd sold his share of the business 5 years ago, moved down to Florida, but we still traded calls on birthdays and Christmas. Except this wasn't either of those. "Bill, you're up, aren't you?" Frank's voice had that gravelly sound it got when he was working late on bids. "Been thinking about you since that Christmas card came." My throat felt tight. "Frank, they're trying to take it all. Yeah, I figured something was coming when Sarah's husband started asking about property values back in October." I sat straighter. "Tom called you?" "Called half the contractors in town, real subtle like. Testing the waters about your holdings." Frank cleared his throat. "Listen, Bill, you're not finished unless you decide you are. Remember the Madison Street project? When the city tried to pull our permits, we made them show their cards," I said slowly. The memory clicked like a deadbolt sliding home. Waited them out until they had to prove their case. "Not yet, Bill." I could hear Frank smile. "Let's make them show their cards." The next hour, we filled legal pads with notes, me in my study, Frank on his lanai in Tampa. No signatures, delay politely, document, everything. Frank would pull bank records. He still had some connections at First National. I'd make copies of everything in that portfolio, store them off-site. "The key," Frank said, "is the deadline. December 31st gives us 6 days to build a case. They'll press hard, but every time they do, they'll leave fingerprints. You taught me that, remember?" I did. Every project needs a timeline. Every timeline needs checkpoints. We mapped it out. Phone calls to make, papers to copy, evidence to gather. A confrontation before the New Year's deadline, but only when we had enough ammunition to make it stick. Dawn was creeping past my blinds when we finished. I stood at my front window, watching the street come alive with early commuters. The leather portfolio waited by the door, and my coat hung ready on its hook. Any minute now, that doorbell would ring. Sarah's lawyer would be wearing a $1,000 suit and carrying a fountain pen with my name on it. The first car turned onto my street. "Let me ask you something. When you've spent your life building things to last, how do you face the people trying to tear them down?" When the doorbell chimed at 8:30 sharp, I already knew what kind of morning this would be. You work construction long enough, you learn to read the weather before it hits. I smoothed my collar and opened the door to exactly what I expected. Sarah standing there with a man who had lawyer written all over him, from his manicured nails to the leather briefcase that probably cost more than my first truck. "Dad," Sarah said, her smile as rehearsed as a model home tour. "This is Mr. Kavanaugh. He's here to help with those papers we discussed." I nodded, keeping my grip firm on the portfolio. "Come in out of the cold. Coffee's fresh." They followed me to the dining room. My dining room where I'd watched Sarah learn to use a fork properly, where we'd celebrated her law school acceptance. Now she was pulling out a chair like she owned it already. "Mr. Whitaker," Kavanaugh said, spreading papers across my oak table. "Your children have expressed concerns about the complexity of managing your estate. This arrangement simplifies everything." I settled into my chair, adjusting my reading glasses. "Mind if I review the specifics?" "Of course," he said, but his tone suggested he'd rather I didn't. Through the kitchen doorway, I spotted David, my son, pacing with his phone. "Got appointments today," he stage whispered to Sarah. "Can't we just—" I thumbed through the pages, asking questions I already knew the answers to. "This clause about property transfers, that takes effect immediately?" "Upon execution," Kavanaugh confirmed, uncapping an expensive-looking pen. "And the investment accounts?" Sarah's fingers drummed the table. "Dad, we went over all this. It's for the best." I held up a hand. "Just being thorough. Would anyone like some water?" These legal terms make my throat dry. Kavanaugh's smile tightened as I shuffled to the kitchen, taking my time with the glasses. When I returned, David was checking his watch again. The lighting's not great here, I said, squinting at the text. Mind if we move to the study? Dad. Sarah's voice had an edge now. This really shouldn't take all morning. I remembered Frank's words from our dawn strategy session. Delay, don't deny, make them overreach. So I kept my tone pleasant, interested, cooperative, just slow enough to make them sweat. They followed me to the study, where I made a show of adjusting my desk lamp. Now, about witnesses. Not necessary for this. Step, Kavanaugh cut in. Just your signature here. He tapped the line with his pen. Sarah produced another pen, one I recognized from my own desk drawer. Here, Dad, use this one. It's your favorite. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. David stood by the door, Sarah hovered at my elbow, and Kavanaugh leaned forward with that practiced smile. All of them watching, waiting, pressing without seeming to press. I took the E pen, feeling its familiar weight. How many contracts had I signed with it? How many deals closed, homes started, dreams built? Now they wanted me to use it to sign away everything I'd built. The pen touched the paper, and I felt their collective breath of relief. But something wasn't right. Even through the fog of pressure and family obligation, a detail nagged at me. Something Frank had mentioned during our planning session, something about proper procedure. You know, I said, lifting the pen, I'd feel better with a notary present, just to make everything official. That's really not, Kavanaugh started. I insist. I set the pen down firmly. After all, we're talking about my entire estate. Shouldn't we do this properly? Sarah's smile cracked slightly. Dad, Mr. Kavanaugh has other appointments today. We can't just... Then we'll reschedule. I closed the portfolio with a soft thump. When we can do it right... The look that passed between them confirmed what Frank had suspected. They hadn't wanted witnesses, hadn't wanted questions, hadn't wanted anything but my signature, quick and quiet, before anyone could look too closely at what they were doing. David's phone buzzed, making him jump. Sarah, we need to... Fine. She stood abruptly. We'll set something up next week, with a notary. But her tone said this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The pen felt like lead in my hand. I set it down, adjusting my collar. Before we proceed, I'd like to review that clause about immediate account access. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Let me grab my reading glasses. Dad, you're wearing glasses, Sarah pointed out, that familiar impatience creeping into her voice. Oh, these. I tapped the frames. These are my distance pair. Need my readers for the fine print. I took my time walking to the study, breathing in the familiar scent of leather-bound books and furniture polish. The drawer where I kept my spare glasses squeaked. Funny how you notice little things when you're playing for time. I deliberately chose an older pair with a scratched lens. Back in the dining room, I hunched over the document, squinting exaggeratedly. This page here? Is that a smudge on paragraph 3? Kavanaugh leaned in. Where exactly? Right there, see? I pointed to a perfectly clear section. Makes the numbers hard to read. Could we get a clean copy? David was already on his phone, pacing by the window. Sarah, that's the bank calling about year-end stuff. I should take this. While Kavanaugh gathered the papers and headed to his car to access his laptop's printer, I slipped my phone under the table. My fingers weren't as quick as my grandkids, but I managed to text Frank. Stalling. Need account pulls today. Sarah hovered nearby, arms crossed. This is taking longer than necessary. Just being thorough, honey. I gave her my best apologetic smile. You always taught me to read the fine print. Remember that used car salesman who tried to pull one over on you in college? Her expression flickered. A memory of when she'd trusted my judgment, maybe. But it passed quickly. Kavanaugh returned with fresh papers. I examined his business card carefully, holding it at different angles. And you'll be providing a witness list. A witness list? He frowned. For the signing. Always good to know who's involved. I remembered countless construction contracts where attention to detail had saved me from costly mistakes. Speaking of which, do you have a second card? For my records. David burst back in, face flushed. We need to wrap this up. I've got meetings all afternoon. Mr. Whitaker, Kavanaugh's professional veneer cracked slightly. Perhaps we should reconvene tomorrow. A quick final visit to handle the signature. Tomorrow? I made a show of checking my calendar. What time were you thinking? 2 o'clock, Sarah cut in firmly. We'll finish this then. I watched them gather their things, noting how Sarah's handbag bulged with what looked like additional paperwork. Kavanagh's confidence was clear in his stride. Tomorrow was just a formality to him, a signature to collect. The door clicked shut behind them. I slumped in my chair, listening to the grandfather clock in the hallway mark another quarter-hour gone. The same clock that had chimed through Sarah's piano practices, David's homework sessions. Now it was counting down the hours until they returned to claim everything. My phone buzzed. Frank's reply, "On it. Local. Branch closes at 4. Meeting you after." I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of each ticking minute. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, they'd be back with fresh papers and dwindling patience. I'd bought a day, but what good was time without ammunition? The clock chimed again, and I thought of all the warm family dinners its bells had announced over the years. Now it was just marking time slipping away, hour by hour, while Frank raced to find something, anything in those account records that could give me leverage before tomorrow's showdown. I walked to the study window, watching Sarah's car pull away. She'd learned to drive in that driveway. David had taught his own kids to ride bikes there. Now they couldn't leave fast enough with their lawyers and their papers and their plans, but they'd be back tomorrow at 2. And unless Frank found something concrete in those accounts, all my stalling tactics wouldn't mean a thing. After they left, I headed straight to my study. "Check the accounts," Frank had said. "Go through everything while I drive to the bank." My hands were steady now. Funny how having a mission can calm your nerves. You know those moments when something feels off, but you can't put your finger on it? Like when a door you always leave locked is unlocked, but nothing's missing. That's how I felt pulling out my bank records. I'd kept joint accounts with both kids for years. For convenience, they'd said. Made sense at the time. If I got sick, they could handle bills. If I was traveling, they could deposit checks. I spread the statements across my desk, the same oak desk where I'd helped Sarah with her algebra, and taught David to balance a checkbook. The familiar smell of wood polish and paper filled my nose as I started scanning line by line. Something had to be there. Look for patterns, Frank had told me. Anything regular that doesn't match your habits. I'd been in construction long enough to know that problems hide in the details. Every house I'd built started with a solid foundation, and every scam I'd avoided came down to spotting the fine print. Now I was archaeological, digging through months of transactions, my reading glasses perched on my nose. The phone rang. "Bill?" Frank's voice crackled through the speaker. "I'm at the bank. They can show recent activity to account holders in person, but they need to verify you. Put them on." The banker's voice was crisp. "Mr. Whitaker, I need to confirm some security information. What was the date of your first crane purchase for the company?" "March 15th, 1982. Bought it used from Henderson Equipment." "And the address of your first commercial project?" 1247 Maple Street. "The old Wilson warehouse conversion." "One last thing, your wedding anniversary?" "June 22nd, 1968. The date still brought a twinge, even all these years after Mary's passing. Papers rustled on Frank's end. "Got it, Bill. They're printing now." "Wait a minute, Bill, you need to see these withdrawals." My pen was already moving, circling transactions I'd found in my own copies. "Automatic transfers?" "Yeah, and check images. All from the joint accounts." I flipped pages, highlighting as I went. 500 here, 800 there. Memo lines reading household and holiday, each one small enough to slip under the radar, but they added up. Thousands over the past few months, and I hadn't authorized any of it. "They're giving me preliminary printouts," Frank said. "We can get certified copies first thing tomorrow." My throat tightened as I matched dates to my own records. The withdrawals started right after Thanksgiving, when Sarah had insisted on helping with my online banking setup. Each transfer was marked with plausible descriptions, the kind that wouldn't raise eyebrows if anyone looked. The garage dinner made more sense now. Keep me isolated, keep me quiet, while they drained the accounts bit by bit. The power of attorney wasn't just about control, it was about covering their tracks. "Frank," I said, "how long will certification take?" "Bank opens at 9, they said an hour, maybe 2 for official copies." I checked the grandfather clock's steady tick. 16 hours until the bank opened, 17 until we'd have proof. But Kavanaugh and the kids would be here at 2, before we could get those certified statements. "They'll push hard for that signature tomorrow," I said, staring at the highlighted numbers that proved my own children had been stealing from me. "Will suspicion be enough to hold them off?" Frank's voice hardened. Keep stalling, I'm heading back with what we have, we'll figure out our next move. I hung up and sat back, letting the weight of betrayal settle into something colder, more focused. The same determination I'd felt facing down crooked suppliers or ruthless developers over the years. My kids thought I was just their doddering old dad, too trusting to notice their scheme. But I hadn't. Built a construction company by being naive. Every house needs a solid foundation, and every con leaves a paper trail. They'd forgotten that their father knew both facts very well. The next morning, I met Frank outside First National before the doors even opened. My leather portfolio felt heavier now, stuffed with highlighted statements and sticky-noted questions. A few early birds hustled past us into the coffee shop next door, their breath frosting in the December air. "You remember Diane Thompson?" Frank asked as we waited. "She's been branch manager here 20 years. Already called her about expediting this." I nodded, thinking back to when Diane had helped arrange construction loans for our bigger projects. Back then, I'd been the one teaching my kids about bank accounts and honest business. Funny how life turns those lessons around on you. The security guard unlocked the doors at exactly 9. Diane met us in the lobby, her familiar warm smile tinged with concern. "Let's use my office, gentlemen. You ever notice how bank offices always smell the same? Like paper and coffee and serious conversations." I settled into the leather chair, spreading out my ID and account documents while Frank explained what we needed. "Certified statements for the joint accounts," he said, "going back 3 months, plus check images and withdrawal authorizations." Diane's fingers moved efficiently across her keyboard. "I'll need to verify a few things, Mr. Whitaker. Your current address and social." I provided the details, watching the printer hum to life behind her desk. Each page emerged with the bank's official stamp, creating a stack that made my stomach sink lower with every addition. "Here are the ATM photos tied to those withdrawals," Diane said, sliding over another set of prints. "And the branch visit logs." Frank leaned in, circling dates with his red pen. "Look here, Bill. Sarah came in 4 times last month, all while you were at your physical therapy appointments." My throat closed up as I matched the timestamps. Every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork, while I was doing exercises for my replaced knee. They hadn't just taken advantage, they'd planned it around my schedule. I remembered how Sarah had insisted on driving me to those appointments, saying she was worried about my driving. Now I knew why she'd been so concerned about my whereabouts. Diane gathered everything into a heavy manila envelope, adding one final certification stamp. When she handed it over, her expression was pure sympathy. Made me feel like I needed a drink, and it wasn't even 10 in the morning. "There's something else," Frank said, as we walked to his office 3 blocks away. "We need to make this visible, really visible, when we confront them." His office hadn't changed much over the years. Same wood paneling, same wall of certificates, same ancient Rolodex that he refused to replace with digital contacts. Frank pulled out a projector he'd borrowed from the community college where he guest lectured. "Let's test this," he said, connecting his laptop. "People can argue with paper, but when you blow up evidence 20 feet wide, it's harder to wiggle out of." We spent the next hour scanning documents and checking image quality. The projector threw sharp, clear pictures of signatures and dates onto Frank's wall. Each withdrawal slip felt like another nail in a coffin I never wanted to build. The grandfather clock in Frank's office, identical to mine, a matched pair we'd bought at auction, chimed noon. The attorney would be showing up at my house in 2 hours, expecting a signature and a quick victory. I thumbed through Frank's Rolodex while he adjusted the laptop settings, finding the card for Patricia Chen, the notary he used for contract work. Slipped it into my wallet next to the certified bank records. "Frank," I said, watching him pack up the projector, "we've got the proof, we've got the tools, but where do we spring this? Has to be somewhere they can't just walk away from, somewhere with witnesses." "The New Year's Eve toast," I said, watching Frank adjust the projector focus one last time. "That's when we do this." Frank lowered his glasses. "You sure? Pretty public way to handle family business." "That's exactly why it has to be then." I laid out my thinking while pacing his office. Everyone's gathered, everyone's listening, and no one walks away from a holiday toast. Plus, half the town will be there. They always come for Sarah's champagne punch. Remember those moments when a plan suddenly feels right? Like when you check the level on a beam and it's perfect on the first try. This was one of those. Frank nodded slowly, then reached for his Rolodex. Patricia Chen's reliable, been notarizing our contracts for 15 years. Let me see if she'll witness. While he made the call, I sat at his desk and started organizing our evidence. Each bank statement told its own story. Withdrawals that lined up with my doctor visits, transfers marked as household expenses that never made it to any household I knew about. My hands shook a little as I labeled each exhibit with post-its. Patricia's in, Frank announced, hanging up. Says she'll arrive at 7:15 just before the toast. Now let's walk through this step by step. We spent the next hour rehearsing our sequence. Start calm, show one, transaction. Let them try to explain it away. Then reveal the pattern, dates, amounts, signatures. Only then mention the judge who'd agreed to hear us first thing January 2nd. Keep your voice steady, Frank advised. The minute you sound angry, they'll try to paint you as unstable. I printed an index of exhibits, making 3 copies for the portfolio. Might seem like overkill, but 40 years in construction taught me to always have backups of important papers. The whole thing felt solid until I started packing up. That's when it hit me, what this would really mean. Exposing my own children's theft in front of their friends, their kids, everyone they'd tried to impress. For a moment, my hand froze on the portfolio. I could just let it go, I heard myself say. Move to a smaller place. Start fresh. Frank's hand landed on my shoulder. Bill, remember what you told me when we bid on our first major project. If you don't stand your ground when it matters, you'll spend your life backing up. I touched the house deed in my portfolio, the one I'd earned nail by nail, payment by payment. The paper felt solid, real, like everything else they were trying to take. You're right, I said, straightening up. Let's finish this. I pulled out my phone and texted Sarah. What time is the toast tomorrow? Her reply came back quick and cold. 7:30 sharp, don't be late. Frank helped me load the projector into my car. The evening was settling in, bells from St. Michael's counting down the hours. Tomorrow night, those same bells would ring in the new year. But first, they'd chime for something else, the truth coming out at last. Remember, Frank said through the car window, I'll handle the technical setup. You just focus on what you need to say. I nodded, thinking about those glasses being raised tomorrow night, thinking about all the toasts over all the years in that house. Births, graduations, promotions, each one a celebration of family. 7:15, I confirmed. You, me, and Patricia, before anyone can stop us. Frank tapped the roof of my car twice, our old signal for all set back in our construction days. Get some rest, Bill. Tomorrow's going to be one hell of a New Year's Eve. The grandfather clock struck 7:28 as I stepped into my living room. Amazing how different a familiar space can feel when your heart's pounding like a hammer drill. Everyone was already there, champagne flutes gleaming in the lamplight, just like every other New Year's Eve. Except this time I wasn't there for the celebration. Frank gave me a subtle nod from his spot by the wall outlet, projector cable in hand. Patricia Chen sat quietly in the corner, her notary journal balanced on a chair arm. Pen ready. Neither of them drew much attention. Just 2 more guests at a crowded party. Perfect. You know that moment when you're about to start a big job and everything gets real quiet in your head. That's how it felt, watching Sarah move to the center of the room, raising her glass with that practiced smile she'd perfected at all those charity events. Before we begin our traditional toast, she announced, I want to thank everyone for being here as we close out another wonderful year in this beautiful home. My fingers tightened around the remote in my pocket. Beautiful home, all right. The one I'd built. The one they were trying to steal right out from under me. I raised my hand, calm as I could make it. Sarah, honey, could I have just 2 minutes first? The surprise on her face was almost worth the price of admission. She recovered quick, though. Dad, we really should stick to our usual 2 minutes, I repeated, my voice carrying that same tone I'd used on job sites when someone wasn't following safety protocols. That's all I need. Before she could object, I clicked the remote. The projector hummed to life, throwing a bright rectangle onto the wall above the fireplace. The room went quiet as the first image appeared, a certified bank statement blown up, nice and clear. Folks, I apologize for interrupting, I said, using my best client meeting voice, but there's something we need to address before any more papers get signed this week. I moved closer to the projection, pointing to a withdrawal slip dated 3 months back. See this signature here? The bank has certified it's not mine, yet it's on my account, made while I was at my quarterly checkup with Dr. Martinez. Murmurs rippled through the room. I caught Tom, my son-in-law, shifting his weight, his champagne glass suddenly unsteady. Click. Next slide. Here's another one. 2 weeks later. Larger amount, same pattern. And here, click, is the bank's official verification of the signature, which matches neither my current signature nor any on file from the past decade. Sarah's face had gone the color of old joint compound. My son Robert was staring at his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. Now, I've been in business long enough to know that coercion voids consent, I continued, gesturing to Patricia. That's why we have a notary present tonight. Any document I might sign under pressure would be officially contested. The projector hummed in the silence, throwing harsh light on facts that couldn't be explained away. I watched faces around the room, neighbors, church friends, my own grandchildren, as understanding dawned. "Dad," Sarah started, her voice brittle, but I wasn't finished. "The next slide shows the pattern," I said, finger on the remote. 3 months of systematic... "Turn it off." Robert's voice cracked like a dry board. He'd finally looked up from his shoes, and what I saw in his face wasn't anger or defiance. It was fear. I held the remote steady, watching them both. Sarah's perfectly arranged party was crumbling around her, and Robert's confidence had vanished like morning dew. The truth was doing its work without me having to say another word. You want to know the strange thing? In that moment, seeing them cornered by their own actions, I felt no satisfaction, just a deep, heavy sadness for what we'd all lost, and what they'd thrown away for a few $1,000s and a power play that had backfired spectacularly. My finger hovered over the button for the next slide. The room held its breath, waiting to see who would break first, the family trying to bury their scheme, or the truth fighting its way into the light. Ever notice how a courthouse feels different at dawn? The marbles got this clean, cold feeling, like judgment hasn't woken up yet, but it's coming. I adjusted my tie in Frank's passenger mirror before we headed up those wide steps. My best suit, the charcoal one I'd worn to my company's 30th anniversary, felt a touch loose now, but it still carried authority. The leather portfolio under my arm held everything we needed: certified bank records, the notary's affidavit from last night, and my own declaration describing how they'd tried to rush that power of attorney through during the holidays. "Ready?" Frank asked, holding the heavy bronze door. I nodded. "Let's finish this." The emergency hearing was set for 8 a.m. sharp. Judge Henderson, a woman I'd never met but who Frank said was known for her attention to detail, sat ramrod straight behind the bench, reviewing our filing. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, looking up, "please explain why you're seeking immediate relief." I cleared my throat. "Your Honor, my children attempted to obtain power of attorney over my estate through coercion, timing their effort to the Christmas and New Year holidays when most offices are closed. They scheduled what they called a quick visit with an attorney, pressuring me to sign immediately." She nodded, gesturing for me to continue. "Moreover," I said, opening the portfolio, "we discovered unauthorized withdrawals from joint accounts, all made during my medical appointments or when I was otherwise occupied. The bank has certified these records, and the pattern is clear." I approached the bench with the exhibits. Judge Henderson studied each page, her frown deepening as she traced the dates and amounts with her finger. The withdrawals told their own story, small enough to fly under the radar individually, but adding up to thousands. "And this power of attorney document," she said, holding up the draft. "They presented this for signature during Christmas dinner, the day after, Your Honor. They'd already set up a chair for me in the garage, away from the family table. I overheard them discussing New Year papers that needed signing." Her eyebrows shot up at that detail. The garage part always got people's attention. It was so nakedly disrespectful that even strangers could feel it in their gut. "The timing is particularly troubling," she said, shuffling through the papers again. "Attempting to execute such documents during a holiday period, when the subject would have limited access to legal counsel or other advisor." She shook her head. "And these withdrawals create a clear pattern of financial exploitation." I stood straight, the way I used to when bidding on major projects. "I'm requesting the court block any transfer of control and freeze additional withdrawals until a full review can be conducted." Judge Henderson didn't hesitate. "Motion granted. I'm issuing an immediate order. No execution of power of attorney, no transfer of property control, and a freeze on all joint accounts pending further review." The gavel cracked like a gunshot. "We'll schedule a full hearing within 30 days. Mr. Whitaker, you'll maintain full legal control of your estate and finances until then." Just like that, the weight lifted. I could breathe again. Really breathe. Not that shallow stuff I'd been doing since Christmas. Frank clapped my shoulder as we gathered our papers. Outside, winter sunshine bounced off the courthouse columns. The air was sharp and clean, like the start of something new. Frank and I stood there a moment, watching our breath cloud in the morning cold. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." He waved it off. "You'd have done the same. Besides, watching you handle that was worth the price of admission." A few early bird lawyers hustled past, briefcases swinging. Down the street I could see the spire of First Presbyterian, where my family had always sat in the third pew, where the congregation had watched my children grow up, seen us pass the offering plate, heard us sing the old hymns together. "Frank," I said slowly, "what do you figure people are saying this morning? About last night?" My old friend adjusted his scarf, considering. The town wasn't that big, and news traveled fast, especially news about respected families and money and betrayal served up at a New Year's Eve party. Frank dropped me at home around 10 that morning. I'd barely hung up my coat when the phone started ringing. You know how news travels in small towns, like lightning through dry timber. I let the answering machine pick up while I made coffee. The old percolator bubbled away, filling the kitchen with that familiar comfort smell, when Frank called. "Bill, you might want to sit down for this," he said. "Word's getting around about last night. Martha from the church council called me. She's known me since the Jensen renovation job. Says she's horrified about what your kids tried to pull." My hand tightened on the receiver. "What exactly are people saying?" "The word thieves came up multiple times." Frank cleared his throat. "And forged. Someone mentioned seeing your daughter at the bank during your hip therapy appointments last month. It's not looking good for their reputation." I remembered those therapy sessions, twice a week, always scheduled for 10 a.m. The bank records had shown withdrawals at 10:15, like clockwork. "There's more," Frank continued. "The Petersons, you know, from First Presbyterian, they're saying the council might ask your son to step down from the finance committee. Something about maintaining trust in the handling of church funds. That would sting." My son had leveraged that position into business connections for years. You could almost hear the dominoes starting to fall. My phone buzzed with incoming texts while Frank was still talking. I checked later. One was from my cousin Margaret. "Bill, I'm so sorry. We had no idea what they were planning. You've always been nothing but generous with everyone." Then came one from my son. "Dad, there are clearly some misunderstandings we need to address. This situation is more complex than it appears." I didn't respond to either message. Instead, I walked to the dining room and opened the cabinet where I keep the good linens. You know the ones. Crisp white tablecloth with the hand-stitched hem, napkins to match. I'd bought them when we paid off the mortgage, hosted a dinner to celebrate being debt-free at last. The iron hissed and steamed as I pressed out the creases, just like I'd watched my mother do every Sunday of my childhood. The familiar motions settled something in my chest. I smoothed the cloth over the table, making sure the corners hung exactly right. Next came the silverware, the good set, the one that had marked every Christmas and Easter since the kids were small. I polished each piece until it gleamed, paying special attention to the carving knife. That knife had sliced every holiday turkey, every Sunday roast, every celebration meal for decades. Its weight felt right in my palm as I turned it, catching glints of winter sunlight. The china came next, then the crystal water glasses. I set one place at the head of the table, my place, with the knife laid precisely on its rest. No folding chair in the garage this time. From the kitchen I could smell the sage and garlic from the small roast I'd put in earlier. Amazing how those scents can fill a house, make it feel lived in, cared for. I lit 2 candles in the silver holders my late wife had loved so much. Standing back, I surveyed the scene. Everything perfectly arranged, everything in its proper place, the way things should be, the way they would be from now on. That's when I heard footsteps in the front hall, measured steps, hesitating slightly. Someone who wasn't sure of their welcome anymore. I kept my eyes on the flame of the nearest candle, watching it dance steady and bright. Behind me, the footsteps drew closer to the dining room doorway. The dining room door creaked, that same slight catch it's had since '82 when I hung it. My daughter entered first, then my son a half step behind. Their faces had that pinched look people get when they've been hearing their name whispered all day, and not in a good way. I stood at the head of my table, where I belonged. The projector case sat on the sideboard, a quiet reminder of last night's revelations. Next to it, my leather portfolio held every bank statement, every withdrawal slip, every piece of certified proof. Facts don't bend to excuses, and numbers don't care about saving face. "Dad," my daughter started, but I held up my hand. The candlelight caught her wedding ring, the one I'd helped her husband pick out back when I thought I knew what kind of man he was. "The judge's order came through this morning," I said, keeping my voice even. "Full control of my accounts and property stays with me. All withdrawals are frozen pending review." I watched that sink in, the legal foundation they'd tried to build crumbling to dust. My son shifted his weight, probably thinking about his office downtown where clients might already be calling to ask awkward questions. "Listen, if we could just explain." Martha called from the church. "Counsel," I continued. "Frank tells me they're concerned about certain positions of financial trust." That hit home. His shoulders sagged just a fraction. "Seems our little New Year's Eve show got people talking. Funny how words like forged and thieves travel in a small town. You could almost hear their carefully built reputations splintering. Years of committee meetings, charity galas, country club dinners, all that social capital, going up in smoke because they got greedy at Christmas." I picked up the carving knife, the same one that had served every family dinner since they were kids. The blade caught the candlelight, throwing back a clean, sharp gleam. Just like always, I tested the edge with my thumb, a habit older than either of them. Taking my seat, my proper seat, mind you, not some folding chair in the garage, I positioned the roast just so. The first slice came, away clean and even, the way good meat should cut when you know what you're doing. The silence stretched while I served myself. Not the awkward kind of quiet, but the heavy kind that falls when people realize they've lost everything they thought they had locked down. I looked up then, letting them feel the weight of what they'd tried to do and what it had cost them. The knife rested easily in my hand, not a threat, just a symbol of who still held the right to carve at this table. "Respect isn't given," I said, my voice carrying clear in that perfect silence. "It's earned and defended."